is living now.
There's a growing level of discontent with the education system in Australia and in countries around the world. In Queensland in the last 5 years, homeschooling has doubled in response to this uneasiness. In this session, I'm going to share with you the reasons for this uneasiness and the ways that things need to change. First, just a bit about myself. I am a teacher by trade, and I taught in Victoria and Queensland. I did a bit of teaching overseas as well. But I never saw the issues associated with the education system, unlike many of you, until I heard a talk by a guy called Sir Ken Robinson. And in that talk called How Schools Kill Creativity, I discovered that education was not as I had seen it. He detailed how the education system had been set up in the industrial era and had used the conveyor belt or manufacturing process as the methodology or the philosophy of education. So they would take kids, they would batch them according to their year of manufacture. They would send them along a narrow line where inputs were put in at different stages whether or not the package was ready to contain them. And it was sent off along different pathways, but only very narrowly defined pathways. And the education system would then, at the end of that time, would spit them out at the other end, really having no knowledge of what they would potentially want to do with their lives. I was so challenged by this that I had to do something about it. And with kids that had come along, I had 2 children, I had to come up with something that was relevant for them and something that didn't actively take away their creativity but would promote that and nurture that. I started a homeschooling co-op called Schooling for Dreamers when my son was 5 years of age, and it worked, but it was still too like the schooling system. So we gave it a break, and for the next couple of years I spent that time researching and reading and viewing and watching and listening just to try and wrap my head around what this thing called education could be. And I read into neuroscience, I read into the way the body develops, I read about how we learn best, how we grow and develop and change. And here in a nutshell is what I found. Might I add that this is becoming my thesis.
This is living now.
Point number 1. Innovation and creativity are the only jobs that are immune to outsourcing or automation. In 5 years, the world is going to change radically, and the pillars of our society in terms of careers are shifting and changing beneath our feet. The medical profession, the law profession, to name a couple, are all going to shift and change because of what is happening in the technological world. Tony Wagner, who wrote the book Creating Innovators, has said that the only 2 things that will cause an economy to flourish and be successful are creativity and innovation. And we as a society have not put a lot of effort into nurturing or even understanding these 2 capacities. Our education system actually does exactly the opposite. In 1968, a guy called George Land was commissioned by NASA to produce a test that would give them a means of understanding the creative capacity of a potential employee. Now they wanted this because obviously they didn't want to spend hundreds and thousands of dollars to educate someone or to train someone and then to realize that they didn't have the creative capacity to fulfill their role. So George Lang went about preparing this test, and they found that it worked very well. They found that it was very useful in predicting the creative capacity of potential employees. Now George found this so interesting that he decided to apply this test to 1,600 children between the ages of 4 and 5. And what he found was astounding. 98% of those children scored in the creative genius level. And he was totally amazed by this, and he decided that it was so significant that he would make this test a longitudinal test. So in 5 years' time, he tested the same cohort of children after they'd been at school between 4 and 5 years. And again, what he found was astounding. The level of creative capacity had dropped from 98% to 30%. Their creative capacity had been eroded so significantly that they had lost a good portion of their ability to be creative within 5 years. He tested the same cohort again 5 years later, and again he found such a significant drop, down to 12% of the children who were able to score in the creative genius level. Now that says something about the education system. It says that we are somehow taking away the capacity of our children to be creative. And for them and for our society, this is devastating.
This is living now.
Number 2, play leads to passion, leads to purpose. The same Tony Wagner, in his book Creating Innovators, for his research, interviewed 150 people who are at the cutting edge of their industries and leading the world in innovation and creativity. He interviewed them, and he also interviewed their ecosystem, so the people around them that cause them to flourish and cause them to be creative and innovative. And he discovered something fascinating. He discovered that for every single one of those individuals, they followed the same pathway towards changing the world. This pathway started at play. Now, play, as we know, allows children to release their imaginations and to explore things, to resolve conflicts, to become strong in their bodies. It increases their language capacity and increases their ability to solve problems. It allows them to delve inside and to find out what their interests, their passions could possibly be. So by giving children the ability or the time to be creative through play, we are actually giving them the key into their destiny. Because through play they discover what they could be passionate about, and they start to explore those areas. So when a child plays, they discover what's inside them, and that leads them into finding out what their passions might be. When somebody discovers what their passions are, they become intrinsically motivated to learn what they need to learn to get to where they want to go. They are driven by intrinsic motivation, and they will end up there. Through passion, they realize that what they're doing could have an impact on the community around them. And that impact could change the culture, or it could shift a person's perspective. And so their passion then starts to have an impact, and it starts to have a reason for being, and that becomes a person's purpose, where they take what they're passionate about and they release it into the community, and change is brought about. Now, unfortunately, the education system is, as we speak, taking away play. It is replacing it with repetitive desk work, where children sit for hours at a day at a desk doing what has been taught them and only learning what we already know. The school is not set up to facilitate this pathway from play to passion to purpose. And things need to change if we are to allow our children to grow and to develop their innovative and creative capacities. Their unique voice is lost to the world when we do not facilitate this pathway via our education system.
This is living now.
Number 3, schools kill creativity. This title comes from the talk of Sir Ken Robinson, his famous talk on the TED Conference Network. And he says that schools kill creativity, and it's quite a confronting statement. However, in a book called The Innovator's DNA, written by authors Dyer, Gregerson and Christensen, they interviewed over 200 people and considered over 10,000 surveys where they were focused on finding what do innovative people do that non-innovative people do not do. What is it in their behaviour that is causing them to flourish where others would flounder, and they would shift back into managerial roles rather than expressing or experimenting with innovation. And they found 5 key skills that innovators practice more than non-innovators, and these skills are fascinating. The first skill is questioning. Innovators question, they ask great questions that lead them to finding answers that nobody has thought of before or considered before. So by asking a great question, they come up with an answer that is new and vibrant and will change the world. Unfortunately, in schools, the whole system is set up around finding the correct answer, not asking a great question. Actually, even asking a good question is the bane of some teachers' lives, where they have to try and suppress that questioning for the sake of time or for the sake of content that they have to get through. The second skill that they found was experimenting, where innovators will experiment for the sake of finding something new again, where they will do experiments not knowing what the outcome will be in order to hopefully come up with something new. Now, school again, your experiments come with a predetermined outcome, and if you don't get that outcome, you can fail an experiment. Now, how can you fail an experiment? Just by the very nature of the word, it is new and it is unknown. The third skill that they found was the skill of associating, where you put 2 things together or more that have never been put together, and you associate them and you force yourself to come up with a novel solution by integrating the characteristics of these 2 different things. Now again, in school, associating is not practiced because kids are learning content that we already understand and we know, and therefore there are limited opportunities for children to investigate the possibilities that can arise when you put 2 things together that have never been put together before. The fourth key characteristic or skill is the skill of observing. So when people are out and about, they're in the natural environment, they're in a community, they have the ability to observe and to be aware of what's going on around them, more so than non-innovative people. Non-innovative people don't see the potentials, they don't see the possibilities, but people who are innovative practice looking and seeing and trying to find unusual situations or even situations in the natural that could lead them to a solution of a problem that the community is experiencing. For example, there's a guy over in India and he saw this family. He lived in India for years, for his whole life in fact, and he saw one day this family riding on a motorcycle. Now in that situation, the whole family was on one motorcycle and it was wet and raining, and as they drove along they lost control and the motorcycle crashed and the family were flung off. Thankfully they were okay and they were able to be helped, but in that situation this guy travelling behind them recognised a problem, and that problem was that why could not people in this socio-economic status be able to afford to purchase a car? So he went about trying to invent, and he spent 8 months just thinking around what he could possibly do to bring to market a vehicle that could cover them and protect them in the rain. And finally he came up with this idea of this car, and this tiny little car called the Tata Nano he brought to market for $2,500. So this car now is the cheapest car on the market, and because of his ability to see a problem and to go after a solution, he has changed the nature of the motor industry in India, and I'm guaranteeing that lives have been saved because he did that. The last skill of an innovator is that they will network, ideas network, not position network. that they will form relationships and establish them for the sake of creating new ideas, not for the sake of climbing a corporate ladder. Now again, with the education system, there is little scope for children to be able to get together, to brainstorm ideas, to come up with original solutions. And so our kids travel through the education system with the anti-processes in play, where they do not have or are not allowed the capacity to explore and to discover things for themselves.
This is living now.
Number 4, education should and must facilitate the journey of finding your element or finding your purpose. With the education system as it is, following after the manufacturing system, the conveyor belt itself allows for little movement. It allows for little flexibility, and unfortunately the opportunities and the experiences that are accorded to our children are very narrowly defined to what was deemed important in the era of industrial era. So there is very little or even no exposure to real life hands-on problems, of being able to solve and explore the things that we as adults take for granted. So people fall off the end of the conveyor belt not knowing what to do with themselves, not knowing where to go, what to do, and they will often end up in courses or university where they will spend years of their time and tens or thousands of dollars trying to work out what's on the inside of them, and to realise that they probably don't want to do that anyway. Our journey towards finding what's on the inside of us should begin as early as possible. We need to give our children exposure to that hands-on, real life experiences where they actually can touch and feel and see what it is like to pursue certain careers or to solve certain types of problems, so that at the end of their education system, because of the exposure that they've had, they understand what their talents are, what their gifts are, what their skills are, and where they could possibly use them to benefit the earth. My husband is case in point. He went through the schooling system, was labelled a failure, and he got to the end working in a factory packing Weet-Bix. Now that was not his calling, yet he did not know what else to do with himself. But thankfully he had a friend who had a flatmate, and she was studying architecture, and he found himself wanting to go over to their place just to see her progress in her assignments. Now, he realised that there was something in him that yearned for the design world and yearned to be involved in that. So he took himself off to TAFE and completed a 2-year diploma, and has set up his own company and run very successfully in the world of architecture, and is passionately involved in that world, and has found his purpose and his calling. But unfortunately that exposure to that world was not afforded to him at the time he went through school, as design wasn't seen to be something that was relevant.
This is living now.
Point 5, active experiences in real life are far more likely to cause learning to occur. This is because meaning is attached to real life experiences. When you're learning through real life, it is meaningful, it is related to your everyday existence, or it's related to something that's going on around you. Therefore, the active experiences in real life become something that your emotions can get involved in. And you know, when your emotions are involved in something, the memory will take that information from the short term to the long term memory in a far more effective and efficient manner, causing real learning to have occurred. You know, the things that you remember from childhood are things that stand out to you, are things that contained emotion, that were relevant and meaningful, and that were exciting or traumatic. And those experiences remain with you, they remain in your memory because of that efficient transfer from the short term to the long term. Now, what if learning could be like this? What if our learning could be so meaningful and so connected to our emotions that there would be such an efficient transfer of information that real learning occurs in far less of a time frame than schools take. You know, if you think about the last 13, 14 or more years that you spent at school, what do you use now that you spent that period of time learning? And would you say that that was a valuable use of your time? In many cases, I would say not.
This is living now.
Number 6, the current system is literally causing brain damage to some children. When we have prolonged periods of stress, cortisol is released into our system and stays there. Now, cortisol is that reaction, that fight or flight reaction where glucose is released into the body to give the muscles the energy to do what is needing to be done. It shuts down certain systems of the body to give the body the keen capacity to move and to react in a situation where fight or flight might be necessary. But when that cortisol is left in the system of the body for an extended period of time, that cortisol actually starts to cause damage to the structure of the brain. And the structure of the brain changes as a result of this cortisol. It interferes with the learning and memory capacity of a person. It causes the immune system to decrease in its ability to function correctly, and it lowers the ability of the body to cope with changes. There is an increase in heart disease and immune problems, and also mental illness. Now, in our culture, we have 26% of students who suffer anxiety and depression and mental health issues, sometimes even leading to suicide. And kids report that one of the main pressures is the education system. It is their schooling experience. It causes them anxiety, and over a prolonged period of time, it will literally change the structure of their brain and cause these problems associated with having the cortisol in their body for extended periods of time. Now, cortisol also, over a long period of time, can also decrease life expectancy. Now, NAPLAN. NAPLAN is, unfortunately, a key factor in the stress experiences of children at school. I've talked to some families where the children, as soon as they know it's a NAPLAN testing year, get anxious and get upset, and for the entire period of that year until the test is over, they experience higher than normal levels of stress. Now, this is causing brain damage in some children, and it must be addressed.
This is living now.
Point 7, labels often stick for life. If a teacher or a system determines that you are a failure, which is in most cases, or if not all cases, illegitimate, and people often wear that label for the rest of their lives. And that label will lead them into certain emotional behaviours that will constrict and will define them for the rest of their lives. For example, they might become lethargic. They might become angry or less able to take risks. They would become unable to grow and develop as they should emotionally. And therefore, a person's life can be totally stunted by a label that was inappropriately given them because they didn't fit the system, they didn't tick the boxes, they didn't match the reports. And yet, each person has been gifted and given the ability or the capacity to contribute to society and to benefit their world. And when labels get placed on children, they often lose the capacity to think broadly or to innovatively solve problems that they come across. So they live small and undefined or unresolved lives. On the other hand, if you are deemed a success at school, sometimes behaviour that can result from that will be arrogance. It will be the inability to listen to other people's opinion and to reflect on what your life is becoming. And so some antisocial behaviours actually get nurtured by the current system of grading, of labelling, of diagnosing, and this can cause more harm than good.
This is living now.
Number 8, disassociating information into subjects causes students to become inept at applying solutions outside of the immediate context. Maths, for example, is in everything in life. It's in music, it's in design, it's in choreography, it's in applied sciences, it's in everything in life. It's in going shopping. Yet we take maths and we take it out of everything in terms of its context. We put it on a worksheet or we deliver it as a blackboard lesson, and that becomes your experience of learning maths. Unfortunately, this disassociation of information from its context causes it to become much more difficult to reapply when you move into context. So you get university students that have done all the study and have all the understanding, yet practically have no concept of what to do when they get to their work environment. Now, if we kept information in context, it would be learned again far more efficiently and effectively because there's meaning attached to context. And when you do something in context, it immediately has an applicable outcome. When I was teaching at the state school, I ran a business unit with the kids where we went out and we discovered what people around us do to make money. And we thought to ourselves, what could we do? What skills or what experience if we had that we could turn into a business opportunity? The kids came up with a whole range of different ideas that we then had to go through with a fine-tooth comb and work out which one was likely to make us more money, which one was illegal so we couldn't do it, which one would we have the facilities to be able to run this business in. And they came up with 2 really clever ideas. Now we then talked about who were the people that we needed to run this type of business. And the children had an opportunity to write a resume and come for an interview with me, and were then given letters of offer to that certain position. Now each of those positions became a committee or a team, and I've never seen teamwork work like this so well, where the students were so motivated to work together for an outcome that they knew was going to be good. So we ran this business. First of all, we had to get to obviously buy equipment, and I talked to them about where we could possibly get our money from, and they thought my credit card was a good answer, which I didn't agree with. So we then taught them about shares, and if you would patch or section the community into little partitions and say, well, if I buy this part of the company, then I will earn this percentage of the profit. And they then took that and taught that to the upper grade levels, and we sold shares, and we made $130 for selling receipts basically. So we took that money and went shopping. We bought what we needed, we compared prices and looked around and finally landed on the piece of equipment we thought would work best for us. And we ran the business, and the kids flourished in that. I have never seen such motivation, such energy, such creativity exhibited as I did in that sector that we ran. And the kids had that real life experience of what it's like to run a business, the problems that you might encounter. The PowerPoint for the fridge in the area we were running the business got knocked or pulled out. And so we as a business had to replace the whole top layer of frozen goods that had just been brought into that freezer. So we had a problem, but we were able to solve it. And I think that gives kids the ability to understand that they're powerful in situations that do come across their pathways. they can solve problems, and that they have the ability to be successful in something that society deems as important.
This is living now.
Number 9. Just-in-time learning is far more meaningful than just-in-case learning. Just in case you might need this for the test, you have to learn it. Just in case you might be an accountant, you need to know these mathematical formulas. The whole education system is premised on just in case, where unfortunately the meaning is not there. Very often when students have to learn bodies of information, there is no relevant, meaningful application to that. Whereas just-in-time learning, on the other hand, means that they're involved in a project that they are intimately connected to and want to finish. And they might stumble across something that they don't know. They don't know how to solve this problem. And just in time, they go, they source the information, and it's immediately relevant to the project that they are out working. Now, in Dream School, we had a challenge where we were to create an aquaponics system, to design and build an aquaponics system. Now, none of us had had any experience at all with aquaponics. We actually had to Google what aquaponics was, yet we wanted to explore and to stretch ourselves to create one of these systems. My group unfortunately got plumbing. Now, I have had zero experience in plumbing, and I was afraid because I thought, oh, we're going to fail our particular part of the project and not be able to bring that to completion. However, because there was a group dynamic and we had to do our part in the play, we went about learning what to do for plumbing, how to set up the plumbing for our aquaponics system. We created a model and we used straws to show us where the water needed to travel and how it needed to move around the system. And with that, we scaled it up to the size of our aquaponic system, and we're able to work out how many meters of what type of pipe, how many elbows, taps, different fittings that we needed, and solved the plumbing problem. And we've created a working aquaponic system which has so empowered us in the sense that we come across things that we don't know how to do every day in life. And yet most people are not empowered or don't realise that they have the capacity to solve the problem because they've been conditioned into thinking that they can't. Now, when you have a challenge and you have the ability to explore and to get things wrong, but getting things wrong is not the end point, it is actually a step in the right direction. If you have that mentality, then you are set up for lifelong learning.
This is living now.
Number 10, better late than early. Dr. Raymond and his wife Dorothy Moore wrote a book by the same title, and they discovered in their research where they took information from many different genres or many different sectors of the learning and developing of children. So the neuroscience, the psychological, the physiological arenas, and they pulled that research in and discovered something that was very interesting. They discovered what they called the integrated maturity level, where all the systems of the body seem to mature at about the same age, and that is between 8 to 10 years of age. Prior to that, every system in the body is at an immature level and cannot cope with the more formal types of environments and learning that we like to impose upon our children. For example, our eyes. Our eyes are malleable and soft between the ages of 8 to 10, where they harden. And they've noticed a significant increase in the problems with children's eyesight in countries that have brought their schooling age earlier and earlier. So they might have started school at 8 and then they've brought it down to 6 and now it's at 5 or 4.5. And the statistical increase of eyesight problems in those communities is very much alarming. So what happens is that when you're not in a schooling or a formal environment, your eyes are working at a long distance or a far-sighted vision. So your eyes are looking around and they're not necessarily needing to focus for longer periods of time. When you're at school, however, the work done is at near sight. It is only centimetres or inches away from your face, and it's directional and it's fine print. And what happens is that in this situation where your eyes are straight, they distort, and then between 8 to 10 years of age they harden. So then you need glasses for the rest of your life to correct the sight, your sight that need never have been destroyed. So with this integrated maturity level, we unfortunately put children into a situation that they're not ready for. Emotionally, children are not ready for the competitive nature of the classroom environment until between 8 to 10 years of age, when they have emotionally matured to handle that type of a situation. So you get children in an environment where they were 1 on 3 or 1 on 2 or 1 on 5 with an adult, and now they're 1 on 28. So you set up immediately a dynamic where they need to compete for the attention of the adult. They also need to compete for friendships, they compete for grades, for playground space, for equipment. This whole situation is set up to facilitate competition rather than collaboration. A really interesting article by Carol Black called 1,000 Rivers looked at this whole understanding of being ready before you start something, so that the connections neurologically are there, that the development of muscles and the systems of the body are in proportion to the time that they're starting something that might need these capacities. And she looked at reading in particular, but she said that there's this bell curve where children will naturally learn something. For example, learning to walk. So some children may start at 9 months of age, but that is not the majority. But the majority do sit between about 11 and 12 months of age, or even 13 months of age. And then some children don't learn to walk until between 17 or 18 months of age. Now, if we were to draw a line on that graph and say all children must learn at 10 months of age, and we arbitrarily draw a line on that graph, what we do is we create a whole body of people who are not ready, yet are forced to learn to do something before they are. We set up multi-million-dollar industries that will teach your child to learn to walk by 10 months of age. And all of this is completely illegitimate when you realize that naturally a child will learn to walk if given the time or the environment that will encourage that. Reading is the same. She says that there is a bell curve for reading, and it's a bell curve where some children start naturally reading by 4 years of age, and then the majority between 5, 6, 7, 8 or even 9 years of age. And then some children won't naturally learn to read till 12 or 13 years of age. And that is a natural progression in an environment where reading is highlighted or is valued. A child will naturally learn to read. If you set or draw a line arbitrarily on that graph and say, okay, by 5, all children need to learn to read, you set up a discrepancy between the two groups. Some are deemed intelligent, others are deemed disabled or learning deficient or slow. And you set up industries around those children to try and support their naturally, like if they were naturally allowed to progress in their reading, that would happen automatically. However, unfortunately, this is what we've done in the schooling system. We have determined times and places where things must be learnt or skills achieved, and yet many of the children are just not physically or psychologically ready. And so we create dysfunction by that nature of drawing that line on the graph.
This is living now.
Number 11, Synergy's prerequisite is collaboration, not competition. As I mentioned before, the schooling environment is set up for competition. Competition for the attention of the teacher, competition for playground space, for resources, for grades. And in that atmosphere of competition, people come against each other, they compete, they do not allow their gifts and talents and understandings to merge and to create innovative solutions to problems they come across. There's a company called IDEO in America. They're considered to be the leading design thinking company in the world by some agencies. And this company, they're coming up with the most crazy innovative solutions to problems that people in the world face, or countries even face. And they have set up this way of bringing together people from all different walks of life to focus their energies on a problem together. And because each of them come with their own perspective or their own understanding or experiences, what they collectively bring to a problem is a multitude of ideas, and they brainstorm and they come together to bring about solutions to problems that nobody's ever thought of before. Now that's done in the atmosphere of collaboration, where synergy is the fuel to creating innovative solutions to problems. Now, they set their students a problem, and that problem was to create a humidity crib for third world environments. This particular group of students decided to hold their first meeting up a tree, just to move themselves out of the traditional ways of thinking. They met up a tree. When they met up a tree, they formulated this plan, and part of that plan was to spend time in the communities that they were designing for. So they went to Nepal, and when they got to Nepal, they realized that there was a whole room full of humidity cribs that were not being used. And they thought to themselves, why would we build or design another humidity crib just to have it sit in the hallways of the hospital? Through their research and through being on the ground with people who would use those services, they realised that most of the babies that needed that type of environment to live were out in the outlying areas and could not make it to hospital in time. They also realised that the people believed that the medicine of the Western world was twice as strong as it should be. So they had to come up with solutions, and what they made was a little sleeping bag that could be warmed by using hot water, and it would hold its warmth for 4 hours so that the baby could thrive and survive. And they are now, they dropped out of college and they're now manufacturing this sleeping bag and literally saving thousands of people's lives because they came together on a problem. They were not competing with each other to find a solution to a problem. And this needs to change in the education environment, where we establish and we nurture a system of relationships based on synergy, based on coming together to solve problems.
This is living now.
Number 12, integration of the generations, even if purely social, reaps educational rewards. In our society as it is, we have separated off the generations. We have put the children over here, the elderly over here, and community happens somewhere in the middle, separate from these two entities. Unfortunately, that causes disconnection, where there is not that relationship, the ability to develop relationships between the generations. We even get our knives out and slice between the year levels, the age groups, and we target age-appropriate information to certain groups. In cultures where relationships are important and are valuable as more important than careers or more important than money making, the community is kept together. The young interact with the old, and there is family cohesiveness because people have shared experiences. When children are sent off to different classes at school, they end up having a completely different life to each other. And you come back to the dining table and you have nothing to talk about at tea time because nobody has been involved in each other's lives. We've had completely separate experiences. and therefore have nothing to relate to when we try and communicate with each other. But when we have shared experiences, when we have those memories, they become fuel and fodder for conversation and for the development of relationship. Now, with the elderly, our unfortunate situation is that we have put them into homes where we have segregated them off from the rest of society for efficiency and care. However, when children interact with the elderly, there are studies that show that there is a significant gain in their educational capacities and abilities, even if the visit was purely social. So we need to be thinking about how we can again integrate the generations, how we can pull them together so that our society is not fragmented and fractured into age groups.
This is living now.
And finally, this is my favourite. Wild rats in their natural environment have more dendritic growth and heavier cortexes than those in an enriched environment. Now, this study has not been trialled on humans as yet, however, we can see the links. There has been a push in recent decades to enrich the lives of our students, of our children, in order to give them opportunities that children in a non-enriched environment may not have. So we send them to kindergarten where they learn and they do in this sort of a small fenced off environment. We like to send our children to clubs and to tutoring and to extracurricular activities, all in the hope that their enriched lives will give them skills and talents that they may not have had. However, in the study of the wild rats, their brains were heavier and the connections between the areas of the brain were far more established and far more mature than those rats that had been put in an enriched environment. Now, there is a swing in the earth in the world understanding towards things like forest kindies, where children for hours can go and play in a natural environment. And their sense of well-being and their sense of belonging and of connecting are far greater than those who are living inside this fabricated environment. In this era of the institutes and the tutoring companies and the classes and the sessions, children end up with no time for play. There is very little unstructured time where they can explore their interests and their passions, and thus they miss out on all the benefits that are associated with play. So we need to be thinking about how we do school, critically thinking about how we do school, because our school system is in rapid fall. We cannot keep pace with what is going on in the world, and our system, as archaic as it is, reflects the values of the industrial era, of 150 years of nothing changing. We need to start the conversations and the policy writing and the ability to allow experimental education to be part of our community and to be part of our way of thinking. And to this end, I challenge the Education Department to rethink, to read the research, to reflect on what is being said, and to make the appropriate changes.